A few weeks ago, we came to you saying we were going to partner up with the wonderful people at rerolls.io in order to gather data. Data that Blizzard has worked hard to kind of not reveal to the public and to make it a bit difficult. And what we got was eye-opening. Let's take a look. We came into this with various hypotheses, gut feelings, right? We talked about the covenants a lot during the alpha and beta, what people were going to do, the addition of the Great Vault, how that was going to impact things. So it was really interesting for us to delve into what players actually did, flavor of the month re-rolling and all that kind of stuff. However, it's important to understand what we don't have. What we do not have is individual player data in terms of what people do with their account. Some accounts have already 10 level 60s on them. Some people still have not hit level 60, which I found out today. So some people have like no characters that are being registered in this. Some people have multiple characters being registered in this, but the skew is going to be somewhere in between. And that's the important thing. We wanted to make sure that we could figure out as much as we can. Now, Mythic Plus does have the most accurate data we can get, and the reason for that is because of rerolls.io, where people were utilizing this tool and other tools like this from the past, such as Gear Score and all those kinds of things. It became apparent that Blizzard needed to update their APIs so they could provide better data. It's as simple as that. People wanted to have their +4s updated because it was something relevant, and previously that data wasn't recorded. So Blizzard put in that effort. They saw it as a valuable tool, and they provided people with a recording of every single dungeon run they did. However, what we do have is extrapolated data from the entire player base. Now, in our previous video, you guys mentioned it's like, oh, this is the only people with the rerolls.io add-on. That is not the case. This is all pulled from Blizzard's open and free API. This is nothing to do with having the rerolls.io add-on. There are no hidden people, but still it does exclude the players in China. And that's because they have different rules on this kind of stuff. So we do have Oceanic, we have the USA, we have Europe, we have the big players here that most of you are interested in. So we also do not have, which is something we would really want, and please provide this Blizzard, accurate PvP data. How many BGs are people doing in a week? How many arenas are they doing? How many rated BGs? Because of course, as we know, the loot system in the Shadowlands has come under some scrutiny and a lot of people are now PvPing, but we can now see that in some interesting data. Let's start with what people did. What would you expect them to do? Our hypothesis was with the Great Vault Edition, a lot more people are going to want to do a lot more dungeons, and that was the case. Initially, people were doing an average of 10 plus Mythic Plus dungeons per week in week 1. That was massively more than we saw in BFA. Now we should also account here, there are massively more characters in the Shadowlands. Now again, it's not account data, but characters that reach level cap than there were in BFA. Shadowlands looking really good. Its alt friendliness in terms of leveling, definitely showing its strength, and coming out of BFA, which had a, how should we say it? Lukewarm reception to its launch, and leading up to its launch caused a lot of people to be pessimistic about buying into the BFA, but of course with the Shadowlands we didn't really have that. So no surprise, many more characters in the Shadowlands, as would be expected. And what we saw in that first week was a massive amount more Mythic Plus being done by the player base than happened in BFA. But here's where it gets interesting. Very quickly, the player base adapts, especially when it comes to gear and getting upgrades. They learn really quick, as we all do. And what did they learn? The Great Vault's not that rewarding, especially if you need to do, say, 6 extra dungeons to gain that extra reward. Not only that, but basic PvP, just even doing some BGs or some simple arenas, far more rewarding. So what happened? Within 4 weeks, the amount of people doing Mythic Plus in the Shadowlands is down to BFA numbers. Think about that for a moment. Even with the addition of far more options, the numbers dropped dramatically over the first few weeks as more and more people started to move away from Mythic Plus and thinking, do I really want to throw in, say, 4 hours of time to get my 4 dungeons done? Especially if you add on another 6 in order to get the 10 dungeon reward, or should I just go and do PvP and get something along the way that I can just steadily upgrade? And that's exactly what happened. Even with the addition of all these extra choices of reward in the Great Vault, people shifted over very quickly. That's pretty interesting in my eyes. Let's move on to covenants. Okay, so the covenant system is ridiculously unsurprising. What we expected to happen though, and we will absolutely accept our failure here, was people would vastly choose whatever they preferred. We heard all along the way, and this is the exact reason we wanted to look into these things, that the vast majority, and you've probably seen this written everywhere, of the player base is a casual player. And casual players don't care about min-maxing, choosing the best, especially if it's going to be pretty close. They're going to choose, especially a system like the Covenants, based on aesthetics and whatever trinkets and toys and mounts and armors come along with it. We can safely, at least in our mind, fundamentally put that to rest as categorically untrue. That is just not what happens. Every scrap of data we have indicates that if one is better, and the community says it's better, and the top simmers say it's better, and the guilds say it's better, people go there. And we saw that from the outset. And a good example of this, because I know many people will go, well, sure, most druids are Ardenweald because Ardenweald fits the druid theme. A good example of this is the rogues. The rogues do not really have, and one could argue it's more Venthyr than anything else, but they don't really have a one that fits the rogue theme particularly. And coming out of the beta, nearly every rogue was going to be Necrolord, in our gut feeling. Necrolord was by far and away the absolute best rogue choice you could go with. Then Blizzard crushed the Covenants, and this is really important, because a lot of people are like, what happened with the Covenants? People were going to be like all torn up about this and wanting to re-roll. Those people do exist, and I talk to them very regularly. Those people who do PvP and PvE find the Covenant system extremely obnoxious. However, most people do tend to lean in one direction or another, either PvE or PvP. Even people who are using PvP to gear up still favor PvE. They just get better gear from doing PvP. And what we found is that there's basically zero rogues playing Necrolord. That is absolutely not what's going on. In fact, they all just shifted over to whatever the most powerful is, and we saw that trend from week one. So rather than people choosing whatever they felt like and then feeling like they needed to readjust, from the get-go, when they made their characters and they reached level 60, nearly everybody chose exactly what was best for their spec. And we even see that more ratified. We see that concreted in the fact that although something like Venthyr Warrior tends to be the thing for DPS, we see an astronomical rise in the protection warriors being Kyrian. Kyrian being better for tanking, and we see that across the board with DKs, Guardian Druids in some cases, which is a little strange because most of them are still playing Convoke. We saw this with Monks as well, all shifting over to Kyrian, even if it's the best DPS one as well, in order to get the better tanking benefits that come from there. Removing bleeds and whatnot is far more useful. So that was a great piece of knowledge to take away. We now know that no, the vast majority does not just choose whatever they feel like because it doesn't matter to them. The vast majority of players will go to whichever is more powerful. And I know many of you are saying, isn't that going to be the case? Well, a lot of people weren't sure. We're pretty sure now. That is exactly what will happen in the overwhelming case. There are the anomalies, and there are always going to be the anomalies. And there are going to be those people watching this right now who are saying, well, I am that Necrolord Guardian Druid. Great, that's fine. Nobody's got a problem with that. It's just a case of you're in a very, very small niche community of people who decided to go that way. But what about those who did do that initially? Well, what we see is exactly what you'd expect. In week 2, a dramatic swap over to the Abyss Covenant. We saw a really large drop in people playing what would be the off-meta Covenants, moving over to what would be now considered the Abyss one. And then that brings us onto Flavor of the Month rerolls. I was really curious about this. Flavor of the Month rerolls. How many people really do that? A lot. A huge amount. What we saw in several instances was classes that were considered weak were dropped in quite a gnarly fashion. And a lot of respecs, if you were a mage, for example, and you thought, I'm going to play Frost, what we saw very quickly is the amount of fire mages shoot way up, and the amount of Frost mages shoot way down. People always gravitate to what is the stronger class, the stronger spec, whatever it might be. Some cases, like Shadow Priest, we actually saw drops in terms of people playing it, and shifts over to things like Windwalker Monk, which were now considered to be Flavor of the Month after the Race to World First. And it's going to be super interesting to track this again in a few weeks after we've just had the MDI. The MDI has probably had a large influence on a lot of people because only 6 or 7 specs got represented through the entire competition, and that might see a massive surge over there. So what we do see is exactly what you'd expect. People who pick up a spec that is considered weak or objectively is weaker. And I think that's fair to say because we do run into this argument of, well, you can do 14s, 15s, or whatever it might be with whatever spec you want. That is absolutely true. But are you going to have a much easier time by re-rolling? More than likely. That is actually going to happen, and the player base does feel that way as we saw those shifts over to there. Now, a lot of this data is pulled from Mythic Plus, and I'm sure many people out there are saying, well, what about the wider player base? Is that the same situation? Yeah. The ratios of people playing these specs and covenants are pretty much identical across the entire player base. Now, that's really interesting, Because now we have people who aren't taking part in things like M+, aren't taking part in raiding, aren't taking part in PvP. These are the casual of the casual. These are characters that are almost completely abandoned in terms of end game content or high end game content. Still the same. Still chose the best way to go. In the overwhelming majority, that's exactly where they went. And that seems to have worked out well when people are coming to dungeons or to raids to figure out what covenants to be. Why aren't people getting angry about this? Why are we rarely ever seeing people asking for, say, a Night Fae Hunter? Well, you just don't. And the reason for that is that's what you expect them to be. Unless it's the absolute rarest occasion you're going to get a hunter who's not playing marksman and is not a Night Fae. Because that's how they go. It's very, 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 very rare. You're not going to bump into a druid who is like balanced, more than likely, if they're DPS, and playing Night Fae. Very, very rare you're going to run into a DPS warrior who is not playing Venthyr. In fact, it's more common to say, do we have a Venthyr in the party? See a DPS warrior, and then you say, oh, yes, we have a DPS warrior. So it's become a non-issue because the crowd just followed the meta. Now, is that a good thing? That's debatable. It does prove to me one thing that I'm not smugly, but kind of sadly taking away from this, that the whole Covenant system is an utter waste of time. Locking off armor sets and all that in story didn't make sense. People just went with whatever Blizzard happened to make the most powerful. And what we did see, though, was that the Covenants that were more fun, I think that's a fair word to use, although it's entirely subjective, ended up being generally considered to be the most powerful ones. If we look at the Druid ones, I would argue every day of the week, Convoke the Spirits is by far the best spell that the Druids got coming into the Shadowlands. Is it then surprising that Convoke the Spirits is also the best spell to have? Situations like that seem to be recurring across every single class and spec, minus the Shadow Priest, who, Shadow Priest though. So that's one of those situations that you just have to kind of look at. I want to say, as we come out of this, and we're going to look deeper into more data as we go forward, I want to say a massive thank you to Nups on the team. Nups is the one who compiled all these wonderful graphs for you to have a look over and see exactly how these shifts and trends happened. They may seem low to you, but they represent a significant amount of people. More importantly, one thing we're going to be looking at in the next week or so are the classes that have stopped scaling. So we mentioned in this video Flavor of the Month rerolling. Flavor of the Month looks like it's going to change relatively dramatically going into the next tier. And the big reason for that, of course, some classes are just naturally good without gear. Like, gear helps, but the way their class plays is very good. But we're now hitting that point where there's a diminishing return on what they're capable of. And the specs that are really good with more gear, they start off weaker at the base, like the Rogue, but once they get more and more gear, they start to rise above, and you're already starting to see that with the classic Flavor of the Month classes of this tier, such as the Marksman Hunter, which I play, dropping down in terms of how powerful they appear to be. And in fact, a little sneaky peek here is that we have seen things on later sims, such as the best DPS specs maybe into the next tier are things like Feral Druid. They are things like Enhancement Shaman. So we're going to be taking a close look at that in the next week or so please tune in for that, because I think you're going to find it really interesting. Is there any surprises here? Were you one of those people who thought the vast majority of people is super casual and doesn't take part in that? Are you surprised that the vast majority of people do take part in Mythic Plus? Because that's the way it looks from our data. It seems very interesting. Are you surprised that the amount of people running dungeons dropped down to BFA numbers so quickly within the first month? I found that pretty surprising, that the Great Vault didn't offer that extra chance. People just couldn't be bothered. Still a lot of people doing it though, that's for sure. And World of Warcraft, I will sign off with this. World of Warcraft looks extremely healthy right now. Very, very healthy. And let's hope the Shadowlands continues. Thank you so much for watching. Again, thank you to Nups, and please check out breachgaming.com and maybe consider becoming a member so that people like Nups can make this stuff for you while I'm busy doing other stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.